The first morning I saw the park was before dawn, and it was lit at night. It was the day of the unveiling, and so it was extremely dramatic to see the park and the columns coming out of the darkness. I was impressed by how the column tells the history of African people from the continent across America through the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. And then as it spirals up, not only do you see people crossing the continent, but settling and creating the city of Tulsa. And then you see its institutions in flames, and you see how my grandfather is there toward the top of the column in a tent since his office has been destroyed. You see the flames coming out from the sides. You see the institutions destroyed. And then you see the rebuilding. And why we think of Tulsa as a story of violence, a story of destruction, we view it as a story of resilience. Because I feel the ultimate goal was to move us out of that area and expand downtown beyond the tracks, north of the tracks. But as you know, my grandfather fought the city ordinance requiring us to rebuild with non-flammable materials all the way to the state Supreme Court. So we were able to rebuild on the ashes. And that's a very powerful metaphor, but it's also a powerful statement of resistance and refusal to be moved. You know, the song "We Shall Not Be Moved" is really germane in this case. We built that area. We intended to stay there until the interstate system destroyed black businesses, communities across the nation. The Eisenhower interstate system destroyed the black business community in Richmond, Virginia, in Durham, North Carolina, in Providence, Rhode Island, in Tulsa, in Washington, Chicago, because we were the weakest politically at that time. Even when you come to Washington and see the Beltway curves to avoid senators' homes and congressmen's homes, because they had the power to stop the highway from coming into their neighborhood. But we didn't yet have elected officials. So while we survived the riot, we didn't survive the interstate. The other salient points of the park for me are of the three statues in the corner near the waterfall, representing hope, humiliation, and hostility. Ed Dwight is playing on the fact that my father's middle name is Hope. He's named for a man named John Hope. It's not Hope as in a name given to women, for example, as a first name Hope. It's a name, it's a composite name because his grandparents named him for their mentor, whose full name was John Hope, the first black president of Atlanta Baptist University, which we know now as Morehouse. But the hope is what faces you, and it's of a man holding a baby who's been born immediately following the massacre. And you know what happens when women are traumatized when they're pregnant? They often give birth prematurely. My grandfather describes in his document that in the convention hall, he sees a woman give birth, and men often are not witness. Then, more now, but certainly not then, men are not witness to this women giving a birth. It's a private, all-women moment. But the children being born out of this destruction is the hope for the new community. The hostility is represented by the man holding the two rifles, white men, angry, mean. And the humiliation was experienced by my grandfather because he was one of the men marched from Greenwood. And he talks about the ruffians, the deputized, young people with no respect for him who march him down, hands up, to the convention hall. So it's a powerful space. Ed Dwight was trained as an astronaut. He knew nothing of African American history. I've been with him in a studio in Denver. I met him here at groundbreaking. I met him here at the unveiling. But I spent the most time with him in his studio in Denver. And explained that one day someone came to him and said, "Do you know who Harriet Tubman was?" He said, "No." "Do you know who Frederick Douglass was?" He said, "No." "Do you know who Sojourner Truth was?" He said, "No." And they said, "Here, read these books. Do not come back and talk to me until you know your history." And since Ed retired of his role as an astronaut, he's dedicated his life and all of his work to telling Black history through his sculpture. And I think this is a magnificent example of a park that he conceived and he executed that is now valuable, not only to our visitors and our citizens, but most importantly, to our youth, so they can understand in another form. You know, we learn in different forms, but if you learn through art, you learn through history, it might have a longer impact than something you just read.